The start of the VCT Americas kickoff is right around the corner, and with this many teams making changes, it's hard to keep track of what rosters will look like in 2025, unless you're a jobless bum whose special interest is watching grown men shoot cartoon guns. And that's why I'm here, to tell you. Let's start by talking about the team that everyone knows and loves, from Zekken stands to Day 110's fans, Sentinels. Sen came off a pretty good year, picking up the Masters Madrid trophy and going on an unexpected run at champions, getting top 4. After such a good year, not many expected this roster to split, but unfortunately, Tens and Saucy retired from competing, leaving Sentinels to find 2 new players. After holding trials, the 2 players they landed on were Narrate from Carmine Corp and Bang from 100 Thieves, 2 very solid looking pickups. They also brought in a new assistant coach and Gunter, MAD's assistant coach for the past 2 years. He also was an assistant coach to Ghost in 2022, the team where Kaplan and John QT originally made their name. But to talk about the players, the pickup that excites me the most would have to be Narrate. Although Bang is an outstanding player, the flexibility that Narrate brings to this team is unmatched, and you can see that in the off-season events and show matches that they participated in. Firstly, during the Red Bull Homeground qualifier when Sentinels didn't have their full roster together, we saw Zekken on Sova for the first time since 2022, and John QT was playing more Initiator, being on Sova, KO, and Fade. And although it wasn't the most serious show match ever, when Sentinels had finally put together their full roster, we saw them playing against Tarek's all-star team, and even more flexibility was shown. We saw Narrate on ISO, Chamber, and Jet, Zekken on Yoru, Neon, and KO, and more Sova gameplay out of John QT. And by the time we got to the Sen City Classic, the first actual tournament Sentinels played with their entire roster, we got to see what their roles will probably look like going into the 2025 season, with John QT playing a lot more Initiator, Narrate on Sentinel, Zelsis on Flex, Bang permanently being on Smokes, and Zekken permanently being on Duelist. We did see some variation during the SOOP VALORANT League, with Sentinels Abyss comp putting Narrate on Omen and keeping him closer to the pack in mid, or even having him with the pack, while having Bang being more of a lurker on Astro with his global utility. We will probably see more of this from them with the recent changes that removed most of Omen's one-ways and gave Astra her 5th star back, giving us a higher possibility of seeing Astra being played. Now if you want to talk about how this team compares to the 2024 roster, and if they can pick up right where they left off, I'd say they'd have a pretty good chance of getting a top placement during kickoff. Although they lost the experience and professionalism that Saucy brought to the roster, the raw firepower these 2 new pickups bring is unmatched. And in a format like this where you have one double elimination bracket to decide if you go to Bangkok, and a smaller scale international tournament where the meta hasn't been fully defined, I could see Sentinels possibly shining in this event. In conclusion, good team. Serious lack of baldness though. Zelsis might have to take one for the team there. Now, for a team that does not have a lack of baldness, but a lack of preparation time, Cloud9. Cloud9 is kind of a weird team to talk about, because they did participate in off-season events, but the rosters they played with will not be the team they'll be debuting in the kickoff. Cloud9's initial roster plan for 2025 was to keep Moose, Zeppa, and Oxy, bring in Rossi to IGL the team, and have Vic be their smokes player. And they did pretty okay during the off-season tournaments they played in with this roster. They had a bit of a rough time at the Sen City Classic, but the Red Bull Homeground was a pretty good showing from them, where they took down teams like G2 and Fnatic to get to the Grand Finals, where they lost 1-3 versus Korean powerhouse T1. A little over a week after this Grand Final though, news came out that Cloud9 were dropping their new IGL Rossi, and replacing him with Mitch. Although this was already an extremely shocking move, removing a player who not only was clearly doing good for the team as an IGL, but also had insane impact as an individual, it somehow only got worse for Cloud9. 10 days after removing Rossi from the team, Cloud9 also let go of Moose, meaning they had changed almost half of their roster only a month before the start of the season, with their first match being on the 17th of January. After trialing new Sentinel players, Cloud9 picked up Net, who like Mitch, is a great pickup, just not when it's a month before the start of the season. Now putting aside the timing of these changes, this is a pretty good roster. I could unironically see this team being good enough later down the line to sneak their way into Masters Toronto, but outside of that, I cannot see them being a top team for kickoff. Next up, I'd like to talk about the team that Cloud9 will be facing in their first match of the season, NRG Esports. Oh my goodness, where do I start with this team? NRG had an abysmal 2024 season considering the players that were on the team, but hopes are extremely high for 2025. NRG has kept FNS, Som, and Ethan from the previous roster, but removed literally every other piece, rebuilding from the coaching staff down. They first brought in Bonkar from Oxygen Esports, a coach who's been highly praised for his work in NA Challengers. And for the players, they brought up 2 guys who have been terrorizing Challengers, Verno from Oxygen and Motto from Moist X Shopify. If these guys were not in Tier 1 this year, I might have blown up NRG headquarters myself, because wow, these guys are insane. And if you didn't watch Challengers, the off-season tournaments NRG participated in will show you how insane they are. In the Sen City Classic, we saw a different NRG, with more aggressive plays and off-the-fly calls with the new blood in this team. Although there were some hiccups, they won the event without dropping a series, and their next event would showcase even more just how insane their new players are. The SOOP VALORANT League started a bit rocky for NRG, with a loss to Rapid Lo-Fi, a Vietnamese Challengers team. but they cleared the rest of the event, taking down Billy Gaming, winning their rematch versus Rapid Lo-Fi to get into the playoffs, beating Made in Thailand, a Thai challengers team with former PayUrX sub CGRS, and taking down Gen G in the grand finals at 3-0. And out of all these games, the player that had the most impact in the server from an outside perspective had to be Verno. When I tell you, this guy will never lose a fair fight and is just so cold in every single clutch situation. He plays his role on Sova so well, and we already saw some maps like Split and Sunset where he picked up Cypher, something I'd hope to see more of from this team. Back on Oxygen, we saw Verno picking up so many more agents like Brimstone, Breach, Killjoy, and Yoru, with the signature agent of course being Sova, and I hope to see more of his flexibility being used on this team. Mata, the other new pickup on this team, has been a top challengers talent for the past few seasons, showing his high-level duelist play in 2024 and his capability to be an insane flash initiator player during 2023. Although I don't think we'll get to see any of his initiator play this season with how good Ethan is on that role, it just goes to show how many possibilities this roster has now with these new players. We will 100% see a more fun NRG this year, a more competitive NRG, and a winning NRG, as I have no doubts that this team can pick up a trophy this year, Masters or Champions. Now, to calm down the hype, let's talk about a team I'm sure a solid 10 of you watching this video cares about, 2Game Esports. 2G is the Ascension winning team from the 2024 season, not to be confused with G2, the Ascension winning team from the 2023 season, as there are some key differences. For one, 2G is Brazilian, and two, G2 is a world-class team. Not to say 2G is terrible, but a common theme you'll see in many power ranking videos is that they're consistently at the bottom, and for pretty good reason. During their run in Ascension, the standout player from this team was always Spike, and although they played with him during their one off-season event, he is currently ineligible for the league due to his age, as he'll be turning 18 in June. 2G does seem to have signed a player to fill his spot until he is old enough, but with his birthday being in June, Spike will only be able to participate in Stage 2, which is around the time for Champions qualification. The roster looks like they'll be going with for Kickoff is Gobera, Prizey, Zap, Silence, and LZ. Even with Spike, this roster is still one I wouldn't have super high hopes for. In Challengers, they're of course a great team. They won Ascension, beat out some pretty good talent, but against the best of the best in Americas and only a year to prove themselves, I don't see them doing anything outstanding. Next up, we have FURIA, a team I'm low-key interested in. They kept 3 players from the 2024 team, with MW Zera, Khalil, and Havoc, as well as keeping their assistant coach Luxera. To replace their head coach, they brought in Loud's 2024 coach, Poe, and the pieces he put together for the last 2 spots of this team are Heat from Crew and Rafer from Brazil Challengers team, Hero Base. For Heat, he was my standout player from Crew in 2024, and someone I'm very excited to see in this team. Rafa's breakout year was 2023 on Challengers team The Union, who went out shockingly at 2023 Ascension, and his 2024 team Hero Base was just as shocking, looking like a top contender to go to 2024 Ascension, but going out in the regional play-ins. This roster itself doesn't seem too crazy looking at their results last year, but a few role swaps is making this roster one I'm keeping my eye on. A big criticism of FURIA in 2024 was that they picked up a young Duelist player in Havoc and put him on every role except for Duelist. This year though, they've put Havoc on Duelist and took MW Zera off of Duelist to put him back onto Initiator. During the singular offseason event they played in and won, the Tixinha Invitational, the roles they went with were Havoc on Duelist, MW Zera on Recon Initiator, Rafa on Flash Initiator, Khalil on Smokes, and Heat on Sentinel. There's an opportunity for a bit of variation for this team, as we've seen all these players pick up different roles during their careers. For my personal expectations, I see them being a super mid team that at best could push for a top 6 placement during Kickoff. Many have them at a bottom placement, and honestly, that's pretty fair. Just looking at the strength of these rosters, I could not imagine FURIA being better than anyone other than 2G. Of course, the VCT never goes as expected though, so maybe they could put together a good performance during Kickoff, but I cannot imagine them ever making an international event this year. You know what? If FURIA even get to a point where they're a single game away from making a Masters or Champions, I will personally buy a FURIA jersey and support them for the rest of the year. We all know FURIA will not be getting close to making a LAN though, so I guess I'll get to keep repping my favorite team, who's also the next team I'll be talking about, 100 Thieves. 100 T had a roller coaster of a 2024, having a rough kickoff, dominating Split 1, going out sad at Shanghai, and losing to Crew in the last Champions qualifying match. They kept most of their roster, only bringing in Xander to replace Bang who went to Sentinels, and 2 unknown assistant coaches that head Zix picked himself, Rudy and Frenia. With the change, the 2025 roster will be Asuna, Cryocells, EU, Boostio, and Xander. The strength of this roster in 2024 was their pop-off potential and adaptability, and they lost none of that with Xander on the team. Xander has been known as a top tier 2 talent for about as long as VALORANT Esports has been around, and he's finally getting his chance on a team with top talent. Even with the strength of talent on this team, their offseason was not too convincing, with the one match they played being a best of 3 against Trust and Plug, a challengers team featuring players from the 2024 Blinn college roster. And let's just say, it did not go well. At all. There is hope though, I swear, and I'm not just saying this because I'm biased. Head coach Zix even said himself that the roster had 12 days of practice going into this, and were coming off of a long break, not having played any matches since July. And despite this being a loss, we saw some new things from 100 Thieves, like Crowd taking up the Sentinel role on some maps, while Boostia moved to a more consistent initiator role, playing Breach on all 3 maps of the series. With the Neon nerfs, as well as the upcoming map pool changes, there will be 3 jet maps in the pool, Abyss, Haven, and Pearl, so Arsenal will most likely end up on Initiator on those maps, while Cryo picks up Duelist. The other 4 maps are most definitely Raze maps though, so I'm interested to see what Cryo will pick up on those. As for how I expect them to perform, they kept a lot of their 2024 team, and with Kickoff being a straight up double elimination bracket, I could see them getting into Bangkok. As for the year, I think they win Toronto and win Champions because they're the best to ever do it, and we're going 2 for 3 on the year, baby! Come on, we have a Champions winning IGL, how can we not win? Let's go! For the past 2 years, MIBR has easily been the worst team in the league, with almost no competition. This year though, the org went all out to change its reputation. They kept their coaches from last year, with head coach Fraud and analyst Lara, as well as a singular player, Artzin, who was clearly the only one worth keeping. They then made a huge move, bringing in Aspas from LEVIATÁN, reportedly allowing him to build the roster however he wanted. It's no secret that Aspas was not satisfied on LEVIATÁN, with their generally lackluster performance for the majority of the year, on top of the fact that management benched the player Aspas truly wanted to play with on that team, NZR, in the middle of the offseason. So of course, with near complete freedom, the first piece Aspas brought in was NZR from FURIA to IGL the team. And to round out the team, they called up 2 Challengers players, Cortesia from Red Canids, a player who was personally recommended by Saucy, and Xenom from Stelle Gaming. We saw a preview of what the roles will look like on this team in the Tixinha Invitational, the one off-season event they did play in. Artzin will be moving more to a flex role, while Xenom will be playing Sentinel for the team. Aspas will of course be playing Duelist, Cortesia will be on Smokes, and NZR will be on Recon Initiators. We have seen Xenon playing Smokes on his previous teams, and with the Astra Omen compositions we saw towards the end of 2024, his team could excel at getting ahead of the meta for 2025. Obviously with Aspas and NZR on the team, expectations are generally high, and after seeing the skill of the rest of this roster during the Tixinha Invitational, there is no doubt that this is a good team. Still, we could see some magic like we did with Loud's 2023 run, where they picked up 2 Challengers players who ended up being some of the best players in their roles, and going on to win the regional and get a top 3 at Champions. I cannot give a prediction for Kickoff, but they will most definitely have a good performance overall in the year. Now if you thought I was glazing NRG or 100 Thieves earlier, you should click off the video now, because the G2 glaze is about to be absurd. G2 in 2025 will be the most remarkable thing anyone will ever see in Valorant esports history. After back-to-back runner-up finishes in regionals and getting a top 3 finish at Masters Shanghai, just to go out with a shocking loss at Champions 2024 in 8th place, G2 kept the majority of the roster, with the only change being Icy getting dropped from the team in favor of picking up Jogamo. Jogamo has been the duelist player to watch since 2023, with his insane movement and ability to make the impossible somehow possible.
Making sure that nobody can really take it. Adjustments. Round away. Jogamo. Goodness me, man.
Of course, his 2024 was a bit lackluster, considering that he was coming off of a Champions win, but that was not due to a lack of individual skill. And with him coming into this already established team of Jonah P, Trent, Valen, and Leaf, I have no idea how they could not do good. They did have a bit of an underwhelming showing at the Red Bull home ground, going out at 3rd place, but I don't think anyone should have doubts about this team, even with that. I don't have much to say about this team other than I'm excited to see them play, and they will definitely be one of the teams going to Bangkok. We know they're going to go to Champions, so why even talk about this team's Kickoff? Crew had a roller coaster of a year in 2024. They went winless in Kickoff, almost undefeated in Stage 1, then bombed out of the playoffs, just to go 1-4 in Stage 2 but still make Champions in the end. They kept the whole coaching staff from the 2024 team and 3 players, Kesnet, Melzer, and Shy, while bringing in Mazzino from LEVIATÁN and Adverso from Challengers team All Knights. The roles on this team are about what you'd expect, with Adverso on Recon Initiator and I'd assume IGL, Mazzino on Flash Initiator, Melzer on Smokes, Kesnet on Duelist, and Shy on Sentinel. During the Tixinha Invitational, we saw them taking 2-0 wins over Shinden, 2G, and Galleries while taking a 2-1 loss against FURIA. This team will most likely be around the higher end of the middle of the pack teams, unless we see another insane performance like they pulled during Stage 1 of last year. Let's be honest though, we all know they're going to make Champions no matter what, just like the last 2 years, so the rest of the year kinda doesn't matter. And for the other Latin American team, we have one Latin American player. LEVIATÁN made some insane moves this offseason, with Aspas and Mazzino leaving the team and bringing in Demon 1 from NRG and Natank from Gentlemates. Natank is the more interesting move, importing a player from an EMEA team that only picked up 3 wins in their 12 matches last season. And it wasn't like he was a super standout on this team either. That's not to say he's a bad player by any means, he's just not the one I or anyone else would expect to be imported. Despite that, my expectations for this team are pretty high, as the strength of this roster overall is pretty good, with the final roster being Calm, Tex, King, Demon 1, and Natank. This roster also gives a lot of opportunities for variation in compositions. Everyone on this roster has played a different role in the past, so the team will most likely move them around quite a bit. We already saw this during the Riot Games 1 show matches they played in Japan. In 3 maps, these were the compositions we saw Lev run. Even so, in an interview a bit before these show matches, we saw Demon One saying that he will mostly be on smokes, Tex will be on duelist, and King will go back to flex. Those will probably be their go-to roles on most maps, but we will definitely see them moving things around quite a bit. Hopefully, we do see a small amount of consistency from this team instead of tossing Raze around like we're on Blacked.com. For my kickoff expectations, I think Lev can come out with a top 4 finish, and I most definitely believe they can be a good team later in the year. The last Brazilian team we have to discuss is Loud, who made shocking moves during the offseason. Their 2 most recognizable players, Sadok and Les, left the team to play in Europe, leaving 2 vacancies on the team. So to play alongside Thieves, Pancada, and Kalanzin, they brought up 2 players from Challengers, Vinny from Red Canids and DG Zin from Hero Base. DG Zin is the more notable player of the 2, having played on FURIA for 2 seasons before playing in Challengers in 2024. I'm pretty interested in his return to the league, because the last we saw of DG Zin in VCT Americas, he was a duelist player with some insane aim. And it seems like he'll continue to play that role on Loud, as we saw a preview of the team's roles in the Tixinha Invitational, with DG Zin on Duelist, Tui's on Sentinel, Vinny on Flash Initiator, and of course, Kalanzin on Recon, and Pancada on Smokes. We saw a bit of variation in their roles on Abyss, running the EDG comp with Tui's on Astra, which works quite well since he was playing as the main Smokes on this team until Stage 2 in 2024. We also saw Tui's playing some Duelist and Initiator during Stage 2, so the possibilities are pretty open. Although this team looks pretty good on paper, with the strength of the other rosters in the league, I cannot see them putting up consistently good enough performances to end up higher than a top 8 finish in Kickoff. Finally, our last team to discuss is one that literally no one can predict, Evil Geniuses. This is a team I think every Americas fan is excited for, but no one has any idea how good they'll be. EG's 2024 season was an embarrassment considering that they were coming off of a world championship as an org, winning only 5 out of 12 matches. Of course, it was a different team, and flashes of brilliance from some of the new players were shown, but changes needed to be made for 2025. Jogamo left the team to play for G2, and Apoth was let go, leaving Derek, Superman, and Nature, and their coaches Potter and Foe. The players that joined the team would surprise many, with Ye coming in from Bleed and Icy coming in from G2. Both of these players are fascinating pickups and for very different reasons. Icy is coming off an insane rookie season, where he had a rough start but ended the year as one of the best duelist players in the world. Meanwhile, Ye had an abysmal time in VCT Pacific with internal team problems, organizational problems, and personal issues, eventually benching himself ahead of Stage 2. Although his performance in Pacific was not outstanding, Ye is looking nice in this team, as we saw during the Sen City Classic. Unfortunately, we did not see Icy in this event since he was not a part of the team at that point, but we got to see how the team looked overall, and boy, let me tell you, everyone looked clean. On top of that, Ye has finally transitioned to a more passive role, picking up Sentinel and Astra, leaving him in a more anchor and lurking heavy position. It seems like everything is perfect for this team, but their side of the bracket in Kickoff is the most unpredictable. Huge unknowns like Crew, Loud, and MIBR could really throw off any prediction, and if they end up in the lower bracket, there's a high chance they'll have to face off against powerhouses like NRG, LEVIATÁN, or G2 to get to the finals. This is where my prediction bracket comes in. Keep in mind, I've changed this about 6 times already, and will probably change it 4 more times before Kickoff starts, but here we go. This is the bracket I'm going with for now, and honestly, even while recording this, I'm looking and thinking about making some changes. Like, MIBR vs 100 Thieves is constantly flip-flopping for me. Same with Evil Geniuses vs Crew, and NRG vs G2. The lower bracket is where it gets really disgusting, and honestly, I don't even want to talk in depth about it. You aren't here for my amazing analysis anyway, because if we're being for real, it's not that amazing. I just like Valorant, man. If you want to see the most stacked league play out, VCT Americas starts on January 16th at 2 PM Pacific Standard Time. If you want to call me stupid in the comments, go for it. I probably deserve it. Anyway, that's it from me.